Israel responded not from the air, which they had the right to do, but on the ground, losing 23 Israeli soldiers, which resulted in a lawsuit by the family members saying, why didn't you drop bombs? Why did you send their soldiers in? There was no massacre at Jenin. That results in, that's why she had to write fiction about it. It didn't happen. There was a battle in Jenin in which fewer people died than were killed at the Park Hotel, most of whom were terrorists. This is total fiction. Total false fiction. You must learn the facts. The facts are different, and the facts are on both sides.
And there's a lot of, but I'd like to frame this and give you a few moments. Because this conversation and versions of this conversation happen in so many places, and they're important. But what makes our time here distinctive and special is how your fictional works relate to these really painful elements. Now, I'm actually saying this to both, but I'd love, as you, in a sense, respond, how does your novel respond to this?
Well, it is a historic fiction, and by historic, it means that the historic aspects of the book are absolutely accurate. I was in Jenin during that massacre, and I was one of the first eyewitnesses to the aftermath of that massacre, and there were bombs, in fact, dropped, and I saw the remnants of them. And I read the reports from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, and they absolutely corroborate what I said. And I would encourage anyone to just go and look at those for yourselves. You don't even have to take my word for it. You know, all this smoke and stuff about 48 and going through this, let me just, luckily Israeli leaders have been more honest and forthright than Mr. Dershowitz. So I'm just going to read you a few quotes. David Ben-Gurion: if I were an Arab leader, I would never sign an agreement with Israel. It is normal. We have taken their country.
That's a famous false quote that has been totally discredited. It never happened. It is a false quote. It appears in every Palestinian propaganda piece.
Let her speak.
Second quote, also by David Ben-Gurion:
never happened.
we must expel the Arabs
didn't
and
even
take
listen.
their places. Quoted in Ben-Gurion and the Palestine Arabs, Oxford Press, 1985.
Tell you what, I'll bet you $1,000 right now that quote.
Let her complete what she's saying.
$1,000 to Hamas.
She didn't interrupt you.
That quote occurred.
I
It's a
find
false
that-
quote.
I find that when people perpetually interrupt others, that either they're afraid of what their opponent is going to say,
Lies need to be interrupted.
or they just like to hear themselves speak. In either case,
They're justifiers of
I find it infantile. The other quote, this one by Raphael Itan, Chief of Staff of Israeli Defense Forces, quoted in the New York Times in 1983. When we have settled the land, all the Arabs will be able to do about it will be to scurry around like drugged cockroaches in a bottle.
Would you like to quote some Palestinian leaders? Would you like to quote
Has any
Hussein?
people ever been seen to give up their territory of their own free will? In the same way, the Arabs of Palestine will not renounce their sovereignty without violence. I also, in response to this claim of an existential threat against Israel in 1967, this quote is by Israeli General Matzyahu Peled. It's quoted in the Haaretz, March 19, 1972. He says, and I quote, "The thesis that the danger of genocide was hanging over us in June of 1967, and that Israel was fighting for its physical existence, is only bluff, which was born and developed after the war." These are not falsities. These are realities that have been written about. They have been verified by Israel's own historians. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is not a myth. It's not falsities, as Mr. Dershowitz would have you believe. It's a reality. 3 million Palestinians live in refugee camps that are not fit for human beings. The rest of us live in a diaspora or live under an unbelievably cruel military occupation that has been condemned by every human rights organization that has ever observed the situation there. Most recently, Richard Goldstone, which again Mr. Dershowitz called a liar and despicable and a Moser of all things, accused Israel of war crimes and the more serious crime of crimes against humanity. These are not falsities, these are realities. Israel has imprisoned an entire people, denied them food, denied them access to clean water, has bombed their schools, has turned 80% of Gaza's children suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Fishermen are not allowed to go and catch fish. People cannot go about their lives. And this has been called by another scholar, which Mr. Dershowitz has also called a liar.
Susan, I'm actually giving you more time than I gave
that's
her.
fine, yeah.
And I think there are so many places in which these, I don't want to call them narratives, I would call them debates, happen. And they're important debates.
Well, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about the future. Susan suggested in her remarks that she does not favor the two-state solution. Can we ask her directly? She talked about Palestine being a multicultural. That sounded to me like the one-state solution. Do you favor the two-state solution?
So I'm gonna pause here.
You don't. Okay, that's clear. She does not favor the two-state
I'll
solution.
take it. No, I need to respond to that, Jim, please.
I will absolutely let you
It's a very important concession.
And I respond to that.
And
but
does you, and just procedure point. Absolutely, I'd love you to respond. So we'll come to this question of the two-state solution and the role.
It's not a two-state solution.
But procedural point. We've advertised that audiences will be able to ask some questions. So I'm going to ask you to respond briefly, and those of you who would like to ask questions, there are microphones here. I'll ask you to ask questions after stating your name. Keep the questions to less than a minute, and they must end with a question mark. Okay? Now, so as we line up, Susan, may I ask you very briefly, not so much to justify the issue that Alan asked, and perhaps what your book implies about a two-state solution or not?
Well, I don't believe in any nation that measures the worth of a human being by their religion any more than I do in states that measure the worth of a human being by the color of their skin.
Like the Palestinian Authority, which is a Muslim
In fact,
authority.
Israel is a state that is founded on the principle of Jewish entitlement and exclusivity, and that's a fact. I don't support that. I don't support that anywhere. I don't support it in Muslim countries. I don't support any kind of basically measuring the worth of a human being, like I said, by such arbitrary measures. And
So religious-based states are not consistent with the message of Imam.
I beg your pardon?
Religion-based.
I don't believe in theocracies, period. I don't believe anywhere.
Let me respond to that. Israel is the most secular country in the Middle
Absolutely,
East.
it's not.
85% of Israelis are secular. Nobody has ever said Israel is a Jewish nation. It is the nation of the Jewish people in the same way that France is the nation of the French people. The Palestinian Constitution sets out that Palestine will be a Muslim state.
No,
Every single
no, it doesn't.
Arab
No, it
state
doesn't.
is a
That's an outright lie.
Muslim state. Every single Muslim state denies rights to its citizens. Jews can't even be citizens of Jordan. Jews can't live freely in Egypt. I've been in those places. Let's talk about reality. You don't accept the right of the Jewish people to have a state, but you insist on the right of the Palestinian people to have a state. You reject the two-state solution. You reject reject the ongoing peace process. You reject efforts to try to resolve this thing in a peaceful way with two states. You are an extremist. You are a zealot. And your views are going to be rejected by history.
Excuse me, whose question is this? His or
I
hers?
think that, I've just been called today, and I think this is Mr. Dershowitz's MO. He has called anyone who disagrees with him this infantile name-calling from moral authorities like Desmond Tutu, whom he called the most evil man in the world, Jimmy Carter, another moral authority, who he likewise called despicable, bigot, liar, impeccable scholars like Walt and Mearsheimer and Chomsky and
Really impeccable.
Richard Goldstone, like I said, when he called a Moser, Richard Goldstone was a professed Zionist and a man of unimpeachable professionalism and integrity. And, the list goes on and on of
So we get to
everyone who
disagree.
disagrees with
We
him gets
get-
called these names. So
Okay.
now I'm an extremist, and quite
Well,
frankly,
but you
I've
reject
acted
it as
an
an
honor to
extremist.
be
That
called
is
to be
extremism.
put in the category that other people